writing instructor here in the Walden Writing Center, and I want to thank you for joining today because we are going to be looking at thesis statements. So first, we will check out the learning objectives for today's webinar. At the end of this session, you will be able to define the purpose of a thesis and be able to tell us why it's important in academic writing. You'll also be able to identify the elements of a strong thesis, along with some strategies for writing your own thesis statements. And then you will also be able to apply those strategies by reviewing and writing thesis statements. This is a practical skills webinar, so we'll have lots of opportunities to talk about and practice today's topic, writing strong thesis statements. So a thesis statement is a concise, specific, and arguable explanation of what your paper or discussion post is about, what your main argument is, what the purpose is for writing it. And traditionally, we see a thesis statement at the end of the introduction. Now, depending on the length and complexity of what you're writing, your introduction may be a single paragraph, and your thesis may be the last sentence of that paragraph. That's a pretty basic and easy location for it. If you have a longer piece, maybe your introduction is 2 paragraphs long and your thesis is near the end of that. What matters is that the thesis exists, and a thesis is important because it's going to keep both you and the reader in the know. It's going to help keep you on topic. When you write a thesis statement, that is where in that sentence you put down your main argument. And if you start to stray from that argument, that means your entire piece of writing is going to stray and become off topic. So a thesis will help keep you on topic. A thesis statement is also important because it sets your reader's expectations.
All right, everyone, it appears as though we're having some technical difficulties here with this webinar. So Melissa's going to log out and log back in, and we'll pick up from there. I apologize for any inconvenience.
Hello, I hope that everybody can hear me now. I apologize, I had some audio problems and was cut off. So Michael, if you could let me know where to pick up, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, sure. We are on slide 4, talking about thesis statements, both the definition and the importance of them.
Okay, great, thank you. So when we talk about a thesis statement is a concise, specific, and arguable explanation of your paper's main argument or purpose. And the goal of that thesis statement is to ensure that both you and your reader know what is going on. So when we talk about a thesis statement today, it is a real statement that exists. It's a sentence or sometimes 2 that appears at or toward the end of your introduction. Now, depending on what you're writing, your introduction could be a single paragraph and the thesis is the last sentence of that paragraph. Maybe in a longer or more complex piece, you'll have a 2-paragraph introduction and the thesis appears near the end. It's where a reader tends to expect it to be, so we like to put it there. The importance of a thesis statement is that it helps out both you and the reader. It helps out you as the writer because it is a statement of what your topic is, what your main argument will be, what your purpose is. And if you start to stray from that main argument or purpose, your whole piece of writing gets off topic. So having a thesis keeps you glued to what you are doing. It's also helpful for the reader because it lets them know what they will be reading. It answers the question, why are you telling me this? Or, so where are you taking this? That thesis statement guides the reader so they know what to come next. When a reader is reading an introduction, they will be shown the background to your topic or key definitions, maybe some important history related to whatever your topic may be. And when they're done reading that, they're going to want to know, okay, so what's next? And the thesis statement shows the reader those things. We like to think of a thesis statement as being a roadmap for that purpose. When your reader reads the thesis, they know exactly what's going to come next. They know all the stops along the way and where the paper will end up. And that would be your main argument or purpose. Academic writing is not about surprises. When we write discussion posts or essays for our course paper, we aren't doing a big reveal or plot twist at the end of it. That piece of writing has a clear purpose and argument, and we tell the reader what it is right in the beginning, and then we fulfill it throughout the rest of the writing. So a thesis statement will let the reader know what to expect, and it also helps to keep you on topic. So when we look at how to write a strong thesis statement, sometimes it helps to define what is not a good thesis. And so some of the things we want to avoid are we want to avoid having a thesis that is not arguable or that just states the topic. So if I were writing a paper about this is not a real assignment, about the best types of dog food, I wouldn't just write a statement saying I'm writing about dog food, because that's not really interesting. It's not very clear to the reader. That's not an argument. It's just the topic. We want to know a little bit more because the topic alone is not that roadmap that we want to see. So here is a more academic example, and this is small business owners employ 35% of the United States workers. Well, that's just a fact. That's not an arguable claim, and maybe this is sort of related to the topic, but where is this going to go? This is a dead end. Are you really able to write 5 pages on small business owners employing 35% of workers? So this doesn't work for a thesis because it's not really showing us what your overall argument or purpose or where the rest of the paper will go. Similarly, if you just name a topic, in this paper I will define 3 best business practices and explain how to apply them, we definitely understand what your purpose is. However, what are those best business practices? Maybe why are they the best? How do we apply them? This is more like the prompt. And at the time of writing your paper, you already know what those business practices are, so it's okay to put them in the thesis. Like I said, a thesis statement is meant to clue the reader in so they know where you're going. There don't need to be surprises. We also like to make sure that our thesis statement is not buried or hidden so that it's hard for a reader to find. Readers tend to expect the thesis at the end of an introduction, and it's a really good idea to put it there. If it appears in the middle of your second page, we're going to read it as if it's part of the essay, and so we like to bring that thesis up front and center right at the end of your introduction. A thesis statement should also not be implied. A thesis statement should be an actual sentence that appears in your writing. If it were printed, you should be able to touch the paper where that sentence exists. So a thesis statement needs to be stated. You may be wondering when you need a thesis statement, and really almost all coursework assignments benefit from having a thesis. Even your briefest responses, shortest discussion posts, they need a thesis statement, just like any long essay, research-based paper, capstones. All of these coursework assignments really benefit from having a thesis. Heck, even sometimes professional writing benefits from having a thesis. If you're writing a letter to like an email to somebody, it helps to make sure that your point appears stated clearly right off in that introduction so they know what the rest of that email is about. It's important to note that your instructor or the directions may not always state that a thesis is required because it's sort of a given. The way that having an introduction or a conclusion, those are sort of givens when it comes to academic writing. So while it may not say include a thesis, it is very good practice to go ahead and include a thesis. Sometimes where you may not have a thesis statement will be your doctoral capstone documents. Those documents have their own set of requirements and formatting and templates, and traditionally the thesis that we talk about tonight does not appear in those. Now that we know what a thesis is and where it appears and why it appears there, how do you even get a thesis? And coming to a thesis is a process that you as a writer have to figure out what works best for you, and how your own writing process um, takes place, what you do at what time, how you collect your evidence, how you think about it, how you take your notes. Usually when you start off writing, you have a general purpose or assignment that you have to fulfill. You've been given some sort of direction. So you want to start off by thinking about the assignment, thinking about the prompt, and really keeping that center throughout your writing process, because you could have a wonderful essay and a great thesis, but if it's not responding to that prompt, it's your piece of writing is not doing the job that it's supposed to. So we start off with that prompt, and we will probably have to collect and gather lots of evidence. And that could be research, that could be our own experiences, our thoughts. And throughout this process, which includes a lot of reading and thinking and note taking, it's important as the writer to stop and think about, okay, what are the relationships and connections between these? What am I going to write about? What is significant, important, interesting to note? What is it that I want to say? And sometimes when I work with students who get stuck in this process, I tell them make a list. What are the 3, 4, 5 things that you want to say? And just make a bulleted list. When you look at those items, you want to make sure that that is the complete picture and that full answer you want to give to the assignment prompt. And if it is, you can wiggle those around in order, and you've created for yourself a really, really rough outline. However, you've also created for yourself the basis of your thesis statement. And that is because if those are your biggest, most important, significant points you're going to make, they probably contain the key words that you'd want to see in your thesis statement. When you are drafting, it is important to note that a thesis will evolve with your draft. You could start off by writing a thesis statement and trying to fulfill it, but as you write that paper, your thesis may change. You also could start with a really vague idea for a thesis, write a draft, and then come back and solidify it. What matters is that your thesis statement matches the paper. So if at any point you want to change one, you have to make sure that both of those parts match. So as you're writing, you really want to assess your paper, and you want to make sure that the thesis is matching it and that the goal you've set for yourself is really doing what you set out for it to do. What is your thesis going to include? Well, I wish that there were an easy answer or a fill-in-the-blank template here, but every assignment is going to have a different purpose and length and function and topic, and so your thesis is going to have to respond to and reflect those things. However, when we look at thesis statements in general, and we'll be looking at a lot of thesis statements here, we look for some parts that make a thesis really strong. And the first is, well, what is your claim? What are you writing about? So not having a topic in your thesis statement and not having an argument in your thesis really means it's not a thesis. So we always want to make sure that we have that specific claim, the topic, what it is you're writing about. Then we also like to see thesis statements that show, well, how are you going to prove that? This could be a preview of your supporting evidence. That could be the research, ideas, sources, details that you're going to use to prove your point. Now, if you have a 20-page paper, you're probably not going to list every piece of evidence or idea that you share in the paper. So you're going to want to try to find the biggest ideas or themes throughout in order to give us that preview into how you are supporting your argument. It's also great if you can weave into there why this matters. If you are able to prove to the reader that you have a significant and important topic in the thesis statement, you will have hooked them for the rest of your writing. So when we look at a thesis statement and when we look at all these statements coming up, we're going to be checking to see if they tell us what that main idea or claim is, how they're going to prove it or back it up, along with why does it even matter? What is significant or important? Here is a first example. And throughout tonight's session, we will be coding these thesis statements. So you will see that the what appears in bold. That's what the topic is. The how it is supported or proven or illustrated will be italicized. And the why the topic matters is underlined. So here we have a thesis statement that happens to do all three of these things. And this thesis statement reads, patient care can be improved by implementing communication standards, which can be applied to shift changes, use of electronic health records, and hand washing protocol. We can tell in this thesis that the topic or main argument is that patient care can be improved by implementing communication standards. There we have our argument. That is the beginning to a strong thesis. We know what the topic is, and we know what this author's argument is. And then they build on it by giving us that, well, how? Like, where are you applying these communication standards? And we have a list of 3 ways. And I know when I read this paper that I'm going to read a section about applying communication standards to shift changes. I know I'm going to have a section about applying communication standards to electronic health records. And I know I'm going to have a section about applying communication standards to hand washing protocol. So this makes this a very strong thesis. And on top of it all, we can see an underlined that this is important because it's about improving patient care. That gives us a connection to the writing because we know that this is significant and can have an important effect. Now, for whatever this assignment may be, it's important to note that a thesis statement is arguable. It presents an opinion which can be backed up. However, because it's arguable, that means that another student in this same class writing the same paper could have a totally different thesis. In fact, somebody else in the class could have instead chosen to argue that patient care could be improved in some other way. So whatever thesis you write is specific to your paper, and we know it's going to be arguable if somebody could say something different. Here is another example of a thesis statement that includes these 3 pieces. Here in this thesis statement, we see again that our topic is bolded. The way that the thesis will be proven is in italics, and the importance is underlined. This thesis reads, smaller neighborhood stores do more for local economies because the money spent there stays local and they tend to be more invested in the community. I know that this entire paper is going to be about the value of small neighborhood stores and how they support economies. And the reasons or the ways they support economies are because the money stays local and these businesses are invested in the community. Again, there's probably going to be 2 main sections that really dig into those reasons. And as a reader, I know that this topic is important because it is how we help local economies. This thesis statement has it all. And it is arguable because somebody could say that small neighborhood stores don't do more for the local economy because they just don't create as many jobs as larger stores. So within this same class, same assignment, 2 different students could have completely different thesis statements. And in fact, those thesis statements could argue opposite points just as these do. All right, we're going to open up a chat box for you. And as we're walking through these, I want you to jump in on the chat to help us assess the thesis statements we will be looking at. Remember, we want to know what the topic is, how it will be supported or proven, and why it matters, why it is important. So when you look at each of these thesis statements in the chat box, I want you to tell me what they have done well and or what they could do better. Already in the chat, there are people pointing out that this is missing how the writer will support this point, and also in what way or why these are beneficial. And those are exactly some things that I would like to see added to this thesis too. A few people have pointed out that this thesis definitely has the what, which is the topic, and it does. Electronic health records are beneficial for medical institutions. When I read that, I know what the topic will be. It's going to be about EHRs and their benefits. However, I don't really know what benefits or in what way, and those are the types of things we would like to see added here. Now, if you had a paper that ended with this as the thesis, it wouldn't be wrong, it just wouldn't be a strong thesis. Also, this one does have an argument to it because you could say that they're not beneficial, but take a look at this revision here. By adding in some supporting way or some ways how this will be supported along with really highlighting the importance of the topic, we end up with a stronger thesis statement. Here's that revision. Electronic health records are beneficial as they allow medical institutions to streamline communication, reduce medication errors, and improve patient outcomes. I can understand that the benefit here is definitely for the patient, which gives me that why the topic matters. And I know as a reader that I'm going to read about 3 sections here that will help and in the end to convince me that EHRs really are beneficial. So this thesis is much stronger because it has all of those points. Here's another thesis that I want you to assess, again in the chat box. And here we want to know we want to look at what the argument or topic is, how it will be supported or proven, and what or why it matters, what the importance is of this topic. So look at this thesis statement and tell me what it is doing well and what it could do better. Here in this thesis, as you can tell, we definitely know what the student will be writing about, and that is online discussion boards. However, as Katina pointed out, this is not even arguable. We do not know if the student thinks that online discussion boards are a pro or a con, if they're looking to improve them. We have no idea what the argument will be. And we are in the fact that we're missing that argument, we don't even have the how it will be supported, and we definitely also do not have that why it matters. This thesis statement is kind of is just repeating what the topic of the entire assignment is, and it is definitely not arguable, and it's missing all 3 of these components. So here we can revise this thesis. Really, it is an entire rewrite. So the revision says instructors can make online discussion boards more effective by consistently engaging students and asking prompting questions throughout the week, improving student learning in the course. When we look at this thesis, we have an argument, a specific what the argument is, and that is that instructors can make online discussion boards more effective. The ways that they can do that include engaging students and asking questions, and this topic matters because it improves student learning. Here is a much more complete thesis, and when you read this one, you know exactly what the rest of the paper will be about, the points that will be argued, and the reasons why they will be presented. And this one is definitely an argument. Here's another thesis statement to assess, and in this one, the thesis reads, in this essay, I will examine 2 scholarly articles to find similarities and differences. Go ahead and tell me what they have done well and what could be improved. Yeah, so here again, we are definitely missing how the writer is going to present this and also what the importance is. And really, I think we're even missing the what here. What is the topic? Scholarly articles about what? Similarities and differences in terms of what? This thesis could probably be put in any assignment in that class or in any course, and it um, would work. It's not very specific. So this thesis statement is not going to effectively keep you, the writer, on track, nor is it going to provide a preview for what's to come for your reader. Here we have a revision, and this revision gets much more specific by sharing with us what they're going to be writing about, how they will support it, along with why it matters. So in this revision, we see in this essay, I will argue that Bohler's autocratic management style, when coupled with Smith's theory of social cognition, can reduce the expenses associated with employee turnover. This is a very clear argument. I know what the two key articles or thinkers are. I know how the student is combining them by looking at their similarities and differences to create this new effect. And one of the things you can see here is that the what and the how and the why are kind of mixed together a little bit in this thesis statement. You do not have to present those three things in that order. They can appear in different orders, kind of all at once, like what we see here in this thesis. I said earlier that there really is not a template or a fill in the blank that you can use to create a thesis. So what matters is that you have these elements and that your thesis is nice and specific and of course connects to whatever the content of your paper is. Here we have an argument because somebody could argue that these two theories combined do something different. Somebody else could argue that you couldn't combine these. There's lots of room for differing opinions here, so we know that this thesis meets that standard of being arguable. Other things that we look for when we look at a thesis are related to the style. We like them to be concise, which means they shouldn't ramble on and on and on. Here on the left, we see a thesis that is definitely not concise. There's a lot going on. Just visually looking at it, you can tell it has too many words, too many commas. This thesis is not concise. We want to be able to scale that back into something much shorter. However, we don't want to have a thesis that is too brief. We want to have thesis statements be specific to what we are presenting in the paper. So here we have two thesis statements about the use of teaching APA, and one of them is a little too rambling, so it's not concise. And the other one just doesn't have enough, so it is not specific. This is a balancing act that we as writers have to produce in all of our work. What works well for us in one paper may not work so well in another one. So again, just like those three elements, these things are writing specific, and every assignment will have its own thing going on where you have to consider how concise uh, or what level of concision and specificity is most appropriate for what you're writing at that time. Here we have a revised thesis that is both concise and specific. And when you look at it just visually on the screen, you can tell that the length is manageable, and you can also see that we have a clear list of points that the writer will make, which means that this is specific. So when we reach a thesis statement like this, we can tell that it has good style and flow and readability because it is both concise and specific. That's that sweet spot we're looking for when it comes to the writing style of our thesis statements. I want to stop now just to see if there are any questions that have come in before we do more practice with thesis statements.
Yeah, the Q&A box has been pretty quiet, so I think we're good to move on. But if you guys have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to ask those.
All right, thank you, Michael. Okay, so we're going to do some practice now with thesis statements. For each little practice, we're going to be reading a passage, and really, I think that should say thesis. We're going to be reading a thesis, and then we will determine whether that thesis is specific, concise, arguable, if it has the how, the why, and the what, and if it needs improvement, we'll even work on rewriting some of them. So we're going to be taking a deeper look at thesis statements, and we're also going to be working on actually rewriting them this time. Here is our very first practice. And even though it says chat on the screen, we are warming up by doing this as a poll. So here in the poll, I want you to mark off which characteristics of a strong thesis that this one illustrates. So in that poll, and you can choose all that apply, you're welcome to select more than one. What does this thesis have that makes it strong? There's still some responses coming in, so I'll give you a minute to make your choices about what makes this strong. Okay, I'm going to share with you these results so you can see how everyone else has responded, although the poll is still live if you wish to participate. When we look at this thesis statement, it actually has a lot going on in it. We know what the topic will be. We know how it will be supported or proven. It's also an argument because we could say that the nurse in the case study is not able to do this, or that maybe a different ethical framework could be used or a different method. There's room to argue here. This is also concise enough that we can read it, and it is specific enough that we know what will come next. So really, this has the characteristics that we look for in a thesis. We know what the topic is, we know how it will be supported, and we know why it matters, because we are avoiding those potential negative outcomes. And of course, it is an argument. So this thesis statement actually has all of those things that we're looking for. And here they are coded if you would like to see them. We have that argument here appears in the middle, which is a little bit different from what we have seen in some of the other thesis statements where we open up with that. Now we could flip this so that it opens up with the statement of what the topic is. And so by moving that up front, this sentence reads a little bit different. So I'll flip back so that you can see this subtle change here. We have, in this first example, it starts off with the how the argument will be supported, which is I will show that by drawing on an ethical framework informed by a variety of sources, that the nurse in the case study is able to do those things. We could, of course, revise this to just open with the nurse in the case study can do these things, and then we end with by drawing on that framework. So this thesis is actually identical. It's just worded in two different ways. You may have 5 different versions of a thesis that would work for your paper. And sometimes I encourage students to write different versions of their thesis and then pick the one that they like best or that they think sounds best according to what it comes after in that introduction. All right, here is another thesis statement practice, and this time you do get to work in the chat box. Here, I want you to revise this thesis. So first you want to take a moment to think to yourself, how could I improve it? What elements are missing here? What could I do to improve this thesis? And then I want you to write a revision of it in the chat box. Writing a thesis takes a little bit longer than just pointing out its flaws, so I'll give you a few extra minutes to work on this one. As you work on your revision of the thesis statement, I'm going to work my way through a revision too, by using this notepad on the screen. And when I look at this thesis statement, I can definitely tell what the topic is. I can tell that this is going to be about the benefits of working with an instructional coach. And so I think I could start with that same opening, that teachers who work with an instructional coach report many benefits, including, and here's where I'd want to list what those benefits are. So looking at some of the things that you have provided, let's see, including, so maybe improved student outcomes and performance. Somebody used the word performance. That's a good one. Improve student performance. And how about, okay, better application of individualized learning plans? Why not? So here I have a thesis statement that is more specific. I have now expressed not only what the argument is, which is that there's many benefits to this, but what those two specific benefits are that I'll use really to support this whole statement. I could do a little bit better of a job of telling us why this matters. However, this thesis statement has been made much more specific, and that will go a long way for it. Here's another revision, and in this revision we have, as opposed to only receiving feedback from an administrator, teachers who work with an instructional coach report many benefits, including stronger lesson plans and greater student achievement. So when I read this thesis, I know that in the essay, teachers working with an instructional coach is going to be compared and contrasted to teachers who only work getting feedback from their principal or vice principal or other administrator. And I know that the main benefits we're going to be looking at those lesson plans and student achievement. So this thesis is a much better roadmap for what that paper will be. The initial thesis, while I could tell the topic, was so vague I didn't really know where that writer was going. Thank you for participating in that chat. We have another one here. Here we have a thesis statement that needs a little bit of help. We need to revise it to make it more concise, but we also need to make sure that it stays specific. So the original thesis reads, choosing the best stakeholders, both individual and teams, to communicate project details with is one project management communication strategy that leads to better project outcomes. Additionally, valuing the time of everyone involved so that meetings are kept at a minimum and emails are concise and rare are other ways to maximize stakeholder participation in a project. That is a lot of words, and that is why we are here to help this writer by making this thesis statement much more concise. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to revise this thesis to make it concise while also ensuring that it stays specific. So when I read this thesis statement, and I read it out loud, so I know how difficult it was to get through, I really wanted to come up with a way to simplify this. And I think one of the things that I would look for is that I want to get this down to a single sentence. And that means that I have to kind of pick what is most important here. So I think that a main idea is definitely going to be about communication and communicating those details, and that it's probably really about a communication strategy. And I know that my why it matters is going to be the better project outcomes. So maybe I want to have a thesis statement that's kind of about a communication strategy. So perhaps I could say that a strong communication strategy includes identifying the most important stakeholders and limiting emails and meetings in order to have better project outcomes. So I've definitely simplified this by just scaling it back to what my argument is about that communication strategy, how I'm going to define that communication strategy, which is in terms of finding the best people and limiting that what I say to them and how often, and the reason why. So I want to thank you guys for participating in this chat. I think that some of you have done a great job shortening it, and I'm going to grab another example here to share with you. And here we have a little flip of the sentence, and it's also shorter than mine. To conserve time and minimize emails, the best stakeholders should communicate project details to increase those project outcomes. And so this I might add terms of communication strategy to it, but it is concise, but it's still specific. We're not missing any of those keywords or ideas. Here is an example of another way to make this one more concise. For better project outcomes, project managers should practice focused communication practices where meetings and emails are kept to a minimum and only the involved stakeholders are included in those communications. This is very concise, but we know without a doubt what the rest of the paper will be about. It is very specific. It has the argument, it has that what. We know how it will be developed and shared with us, and also we know what's so important, and that is those improved, those better project outcomes. All right, we have time for one more chat, so we're going to do another practice here. And for this one, instead of revising a thesis, we are going to draft a thesis on our own. So this is an sample assignment prompt that a student could get in their coursework. And that is, online courses have become increasingly popular in higher education. Develop an argument for why you think the number of online students is increasing, supporting your argument with sources and evidence. So we want to think about this topic for a minute. Remember, way back at the beginning of this webinar, I said that the creation of a thesis really lies in doing a lot of thinking about your topic and determining what points you wish to make. So here for this one, I want you to write a preliminary or initial draft of a thesis statement that would work for this assignment. All right, some answers are coming in here, so we'll take a look at them. For this assignment, we know that we have to talk about why the number of online students is increasing. So we'll want to make sure that we have the main idea that there's popularity when it comes to an online education. And this sample thesis statement that came in the chat box does a good job of that. It tells us that the popularity of online higher education has been driven by demands of students wanting to be online, courses providing flexibility in scheduling, and in terms of their access. So as a reader, I know that this paper is going to be about how popular online education is, and specifically about how students want to be in an online environment and that they want flexibility in terms of their schedule and access. This is clear and specific. It tells us what the topic is and how it will be supported. Another potential revision is up on the slide, and this one says, or not revision, a potential draft, and this one says, online courses are becoming increasingly popular in higher education because students value flexibility and are digital natives who feel comfortable with the technology. In this paper, I know that it's going to really focus in on the ideas of flexibility and that these learners are comfortable with technology. There are a ton of different points that could have made their way into your thesis, and what matters most is if you were actually writing this, that your thesis matched your paper. So if your ideas look different from what you see on the screen right now, that's okay because thesis statements have that variety. It just depends what you want to write about and what points you wish to make. Thank you for participating again in that chat. We did not have a Q&A box open during those chats, so I want to make sure that if you have any questions that you go ahead and add them in that Q&A box now so that Michael can ask them and I can help address them for you while we do the recap here at the end. So I will let you get any questions you have in, and then at the end I'll see if there's any that we should talk about. So a couple final tips that I would like to share with you are that your thesis statement length really depends on your assignment. We looked at all single sentence thesis statements, and for the vast majority of academic writing, this single sentence thesis tends to work. I think it's what I see most of the time. However, if you have a longer assignment, your thesis may stretch out to become 2 sentences long. And again, that's fine. It really just depends on what your assignment is. A longer assignment is likely to have a longer thesis. It's also important to note that a discussion post still benefits from having a thesis statement. Even a one-page reflection benefits from having a thesis statement. However, if you are working on a dissertation or a capstone study or a document that is part of your dissertation, these things tend to have research questions, problem and purpose statements instead of a thesis. They are a totally different type of assignment. And so the thesis statement guidelines we looked at today typically do not apply to those. If you're looking for additional resources on this topic, I'd like to share with you the thesis statements page on our website. We also have a blog post about how creating an argument is important for your thesis statement, and in fact, we want to see an argument in your thesis. We also have a podcast about thesis statements, and there is another webinar that will help you write a thesis statement, and that one is about demystifying the Walden assignment prompts. And in this webinar, we take a look at some sample course paper prompts and we deconstruct them to look at how to best address them. And of course, part of addressing a prompt is writing a thesis. So that webinar is a great companion webinar to tonight's session. Before we wrap up, I'll just see if any questions came in, Michael, that we should talk about.
Hey Melissa, yeah, it's been pretty quiet in the Q&A box, so I think with that, I'll remind you that if you have questions that come up later, or if you're watching this recording, you can go ahead and send those to this email address at the top of the slide, writingsupport@waldenu.edu. We also have some live chat hours on our website where you can get some live discussion or have a live chat with a writing instructor about some writing related topics if you choose. So you can take a look at that there also. Beyond that, a couple more resources. I know Melissa mentioned many great resources. There's also another webinar regarding practical skills, paraphrasing source information, so that would be something that you could check out. Um, Also, building and organizing academic arguments is another webinar that can be really useful to you as you move on into crafting some larger pieces and crafting some more complicated academic arguments. Lastly, a keynote service for us in the Writing Center. We do have one-to-one paper reviews. So if that's something that you think would benefit you, by all means take advantage of that. What that really is just working one-on-one asynchronously with a writing instructor with an assignment, a coursework assignment or a pre-proposal document that you'll get some feedback to help you improve that piece and improve yourself as a writer. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you again, Melissa. Thank you all for attending. Have a great day. Have a great night.